Hello and welcome. You're watching India Today Explains. I'm Akshita and this is a special 1-hour broadcast where we look back at some of the biggest news events of 2025. From Operation Sindoor to the tariff showdown, from the fight against Naxalism to the big political showdown over 50 years of emergency, 2025 has been a roller coaster ride for India. And we take a look at some of these big national headlines and also talk about the big international developments that shaped 2025. From the controversial Epstein files to an AI minister in Albania to a social media ban in Australia for teenagers. So many stories set the tone for the next 365 days. So let's begin our recap journey first with the big national talking points of 2025. The Modi government has been cracking down on Pakistan terror, but in one of the most significant steps, the government has now said any future act of terror will be treated as an act of war.
अगर पाकिस्तान ने फिर से आतंकी गतिविधि या सैन्य दुस्साहस दिखाया तो हम उसका मुंह तोड़ जवाब देंगे.
It is Pakistani actions that have constituted provocation and escalation. In response, India has defended and reacted in a responsible and measured fashion.
So what exactly does that mean? What is an act of war? Let's break that down for you. By definition, act of war under international law is referred to as an action by a state or military force that's considered a deliberate provocation or aggression, potentially leading to war. These acts typically violate peace agreements or international law and signal aggression or military intent. So what classifies as an act of war? Armed attacks on a nation's military or civilians, invasion of territory, bombing or airstrikes, naval blockades, cyber attacks, and also supporting militant groups or terrorism across the border, which is where Pakistan fits right in. So from the above list I've mentioned, it's clear that terror easily falls in this bracket. But what does it actually achieve to declare an act of terror as an act of war? Let's break down how the term act of war is recognized internationally. So this is according to the UN Charter, Article 2.4. Using force against territorial integrity or political independence of any state is prohibited. So when a nation declares a hostile action by another country as an act of war, it signals that it may now respond with military force or self-defense as permitted under international law. So what happens when a country declares an act of war? So when a country formally goes ahead and makes that declaration, a series of legal, military and diplomatic consequences arise. We'll break that down step by step. First, military. All the defense forces and military assets will be put on high alert. An increased troop presence will be ensured at the borders in order to carry out defense or retaliatory action. All air defense mechanism will be initiated along with setting up naval blockades. The government may announce suspension of certain civil liberties or even consider enacting emergency laws. The conflict will go international, involving the United Nations and other allies. The allied countries will have to raise their stance on the issue, either supporting or condemning it. Various diplomatic talks, therefore, will have to be carried out, and this can also lead to imposition of sanctions against the country that's violating the rule. Though act of war is not a full-blown conflict or a war, there will be a high risk of escalation for it to turn into one. Acts such as ground invasions, multiple airstrikes, counter-airstrikes, infrastructure damage, attack on civilians will lead to escalation. Now, the country may also witness nationwide curfews, a blackout, sirens, evacuations, all of it sounds familiar. Public services like internet, food, fuel might even be stopped temporarily if it goes to that extreme. Now, censorships on media might be imposed to maintain privacy about the country's defense actions. Both the countries have to abide by the Geneva Conventions, which are a set of international treaties that aim to limit brutality of war. They regulate the conduct of armed conflict and humanitarian protection of war victims. For India, Operation Sindoor is the new normal, and so any Pakistani terror act will be met with a counter and a fitting response. You saw that many of the mentions that I made of the kind of actions that have been taken were part of Operation Sindoor, which is why the government has said This doctrine is the new normal. Operation Sindoor, that was launched to deliver justice to the innocent victims of the Pahalgam terror attack, concluded after 3 days of intense air and drone strikes. So let's tell you about previous military engagements between India and Pakistan. India and Pakistan share a long and complex history of military tensions and conflict, marked by multiple wars, cross-border skirmishes and diplomatic standoffs since partition. The first India-Pakistan war took place between 1947 and 1949, shortly after partition. It began in October 1947 when Pakistan-backed tribal militia invaded Jammu and Kashmir. In response, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, then Deputy Prime Minister and Home Minister, pushed for military action, and Indian troops were airlifted to Srinagar on 22 October 1947 to repel the invaders. Jammu and Kashmir signed the Instrument of Accession with India on 26 October 1947. And then, in a few months, on 1st January 1948, then Prime Minister Nehru took the issue to the United Nations of Pakistan attempting to stir trouble, which led to a UN-mediated ceasefire and the Karachi Agreement. India retained 2/3 of the territory. Pakistan occupied what became Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, that's POK, marking the start of the Kashmir dispute. In 1965 is when the next war broke out. India and Pakistan fought again after Pakistan launched Operation Gibraltar, a covert mission to infiltrate thousands of soldiers into Jammu and Kashmir and incite an insurgency. The plan failed to get local support, prompting India to launch a full-scale military offensive across the international border, targeting Lahore, Sialkot and other areas in West Pakistan. The 17-day war featured the largest tank battle since World War II, notably at the Battle of Asal Uttar, where Indian forces repelled Pakistani advances. India also gained air superiority and made territorial gains in the Lahore and Rajasthan fronts. In response, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 211, leading to a ceasefire on 23 September 1965. The war officially ended with the Tashkent Declaration on 10 January 1966, mediated by the Soviet Union in Uzbekistan. The 1971 war then marked a turning point in India-Pakistan relations, as it was rooted not in Kashmir but in a political conflict between East Pakistan's Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and West Pakistani leaders Yahya Khan and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Pakistan launched Operation Searchlight to suppress the Bengali nationalist movement, leading to mass atrocities and a refugee crisis, with about 10 million Bengalis fleeing into India. In response, India intervened militarily, capturing 15,010 square kilometers of Pakistani territory. This was across POK, Punjab and Sindh, but India eventually returned it to Pakistan. The war ended in a decisive Indian victory with the surrender of over 90,000 Pakistani troops and the creation of Bangladesh on March 26, 1971. That point there about the surrender of over 90,000 Pakistani troops, that's the largest surrender in the world after World War II.
All the world admires a deed well done, and I think with all modesty we can say that we have done this action well. But let us not forget that the road ahead is still long and very steep, and we have many peaks to scale.
So this picture, which you see often, was of the signing of the Pakistan Instrument of Surrender, which led to the formation of Bangladesh. Let's now move to 1987, when tensions between India and Pakistan escalated. This was due to the widespread unrest triggered by alleged rigging in the 1987 Kashmir elections and the subsequent rise of separatist groups. India accused Pakistan of providing financial, logistical and training support to terrorists, while Pakistan claimed it only offered moral and diplomatic backing. Both countries increased military presence along the line of control, leading to frequent skirmishes. India conducted a major military exercise, Operation Brass Tacks, near the Pakistan border, which Islamabad perceived as a potential invasion. The situation in 1990 was dangerously close to a nuclear conflict. The United Nations attempted mediation, calling for a ceasefire and demilitarization, but the conflict persisted throughout the 1990s. And then in early 1999, Pakistani paramilitary forces and regular troops infiltrated across the LOC, occupying our territory, Indian territory, primarily in the Kargil district, aiming to alter the LOC and gain control of the Srinagar-Leh highway. Pakistan initially denied involvement, claiming the infiltrators were terrorists, but later admitted its military's role. India launched a strong military and diplomatic offensive, and after 2 months of conflict, recaptured 75 to 80% of the territory. Under pressure from then US President Bill Clinton, Pakistan was forced to withdraw its remaining forces. The conflict led to international isolation for Pakistan and further weakened its already fragile economy. Though initially denying its losses, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif later admitted that over 4,000 Pakistani soldiers were killed and that Pakistan had lost the conflict. Apart from the major wars, India and Pakistan have also engaged in several regional conflicts that did not escalate into full-scale war. In 1965, the Kutch conflict occurred in the Run of Kutch, following Operation Desert Hawk launched by the Pakistan Army. Though with India, the boundary remained unresolved since the 1947 partition. Another significant standoff was the Siachen conflict between 1984 to 2003, which began with India's capture of the Siachen Glacier during Operation Meghdoot in 1984 and continued with Operation Rajiv in 1987. India also took control of the 70-kilometer-long glacier, its tributaries and key passes on the Saltoro Ridge, Siala, Bilafondla and Gyongla, with Pakistan retained control of the glacial valleys to the west. Although a ceasefire was declared in 2003, both sides continue to maintain a very heavy military presence in the region. The tensions between India and Pakistan have led to a full-blown conflict and war many times in the past, and Pakistan to date continues to peddle terror and attempt to destabilize India's progress. There's been a huge breakthrough in the fight against Red Terror in 2025, with top Naxal commanders being eliminated, taking us one step closer to a Naxal Mukt Bharat. Amit Shah has promised that under the Modi government, Naxalism will be wiped out in 2026. So let's decode for you how Naxalism took roots in India and decades on still remains a threat to our forces. Naxalism is a movement by left extremist groups. They've often been called Maoists too because they support Maoist ideology. It's a doctrine essentially developed by Mao Zedong to capture power from governments through armed insurgencies. So how did this movement actually seep into India? Let's go back to 1967, where Naxalism first took roots in the state of Bengal. The Naxalbari uprising was led by peasants who revolted against landowners. That's where Naxalism also, by the way, got its name from, courtesy the village where the first revolt took place. The Naxalbari movement was backed by a group called the Siliguri Group. It's a faction of the CPIM. CPIM then was Communist Party of India Marxist. Leaders like Charu Majumdar, Kanu Sanyal and Jungle Santal vowed their support to these villagers and said that they were even willing to resort to an armed struggle to ensure land was redistributed to the landless. 11 people died in that struggle, including a police officer. But this was just the beginning. In 1969, the CPI-ML, which is Marxist-Leninist, was formed by the Siliguri Group because of a rebellion within the party. And the movement started gaining ground beyond Bengal as well. Youngsters particularly were very taken by the movement. In terms like class enemies, annihilation line became the theme of the movement. What that meant is to assassinate those who belonged to powerful positions. It was in 1980 that Naxalism spread like wildfire in Andhra Pradesh, particularly along the Andhra-Odisha border. After Naxals abducted landlords, killed police officials, the government cracked the whip, setting up a special force called the Greyhounds, and thereby dented the extremist movement. Now, the next important date to remember in the Naxal movement is September 2004. This was when the CPI Maoist was founded through the merger of two Naxal groups. And after this, the 2000s unfortunately saw a bloodied conflict in many parts of the country. Between 2004 to 2023, 8,803 people have been killed in different parts of India because of Naxalism. According to the Home Ministry, majority of the civilians killed are tribals, often branded as police informers before being brutally tortured and killed by Naxalites. That's why the UPA government in 2009 banned the CPI Maoist under the UAPA, declaring it as a terrorist organization. Let's now talk about the worst affected states by Naxalism. Now, the influence zone of the Naxalites is called the Red Corridor, which spanned nearly 25 districts. Mind you, that number has drastically reduced today. But in the peak of the Naxal movement, it was Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Odisha, West Bengal, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Bihar, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, and even Kerala. Now, the Red Corridor is usually some of the poorer districts with a high tribal population, and development, importantly, in these parts have been met with violence and complete resistance. Now, let's also talk and tell you about some of the worst Naxal attacks that India has witnessed. The most recent bloodied one was in April 2023 when 10 security personnel, while returning from a counter-insurgency operation along with the driver, were killed when the vehicle they were travelling in was blown up by Naxals. This happened in Chhattisgarh's Dantewada. And then there was April 2021 where 22 security forces were killed by Naxals, again in Chhattisgarh, but this time in Sukma district. But the worst attack on our forces by Naxals was in 2010, when 300 Naxals attacked a CRPF convoy when they were returning after an operation, leading to 76 CRPF personnel losing their lives. It's important to also highlight here that the deaths in the last few years due to Naxals have come down. More and more Naxals now are surrendering their arms before the government. How is the government ensuring this? Let's now get you the details of how the government is tackling the Naxal threat. The Modi government, under Home Minister Amit Shah, has vowed to end Naxalism by March 2026. That's the deadline they've set for themselves. And they're planning to do so by establishing rule of laws in Naxal-affected areas. That's basically first, stop illegal activities, and second, to ensure the development in those areas that were deprived of the same by Naxals, to ensure minimal support to the extremists. But the biggest step that's also in fact been a game changer is incentivizing those Naxals who surrender. So here's what the government scheme is. Naxals who surrender get trained in a trade of their choice so they can go ahead and secure a job. They're also given a monthly stipend of 2,000 rupees for 36 months so that they can find a job, until then continue to fend for themselves. Not just that, 1.5 lakh rupees is also given as an immediate grant. And if they surrender with weapons, then that amount actually increases based on which weapon they've handed over to the forces. And so, in a state like Chhattisgarh, for example, since January 2024, over 723 Naxals have surrendered and given up arms. The delimitation exercise slated for 2026 has sparked a storm, particularly among southern states, who claim this will result in the number of parliamentary seats for them falling. Is that actually going to happen? Let's break it down for you. Let's begin by telling you exactly what delimitation is. It's the process of fixing the number of Lok Sabha and Assembly seats in states and union territories. Delimitation, as per the Constitution, must happen after each census exercise. And since the census exercise will be kicked off soon and the numbers will be out in 2026, delimitation will also happen next year. Usually, the census takes place every 10 years, but because of COVID in 2021, the census couldn't happen, and so it was pushed to 2026. So who conducts this exercise? Well, it's done by a delimitation commission that's set up under an act of parliament. The reason this delimitation is done is to ensure that as population grows, the number of constituencies also grow. Essentially, population numbers dictate number of seats in each state. For example, the 1951 census showed we had a population of 36.1 crore. So the number of Lok Sabha seats were fixed at 494. The next census, 10 years later, in 1961, our population became 43.9 crore, so seats went up to 522. And so with every census, number of constituencies went up. This obviously means that states with a larger population get more representation in parliament. That does seem unfair, right? Which is why, as per the 1971 census, this process was frozen to encourage population control measures. So then in 2001, for example, after the census was carried out, the boundaries of constitution were adjusted without changing the number of seats. But here's the catch. This freeze on the process was only till 2026. So next year, there are questions about how the delimitation exercise will be carried out and if the parliamentary seats will be changed. Now, if the delimitation exercise is carried out based on population numbers, it could mean that southern states, northeastern states will lose out, and states like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, which has seen a population boom, will benefit. Tamil Nadu could lose about 8 to 9 seats of their 39. Kerala could lose 8 seats. Karnataka could lose 2. Andhra, Telangana could lose about 8 seats. And Uttar Pradesh could actually gain about 11 seats. Bihar could get 10 more seats. Rajasthan could go up from 25 to 31 seats, so gain of 6 seats. What that translates to is that states which have successfully controlled their population numbers will be punished with lesser parliamentary seats. But all this, at the moment, mind you, is just conjecture, considering we don't really have clarity on how the delimitation exercise will happen. Southern states are extremely wary because of the numbers I just showed you. And so chief ministers like MK Stalin have sought unity among regional parties to oppose delimitation.
இப்போ நாடு முழுக்க இருக்கக்கூடிய மக்களவை அடிப்படையில் தொகுதிகளை பிரித்தா தமிழ்நாட்டில் இருக்கக்கூடிய தொகுதிகளில் 8 தொகுதிகளை இழக்க வேண்டிய ஒரு சூழ்நிலை ஏற்பட்டிருக்கு. அதாவது தமிழ்நாட்டுக்கு 39 எம்பிகள் இருக்க மாட்டாங்க, 31 எம்பிகள் தான் இருப்பாங்க. அதிக மக்கள் தொகை கொண்ட மாநிலங்களுக்கு அதிக பிரதிநிதித்துவம் கிடைக்கும். இதனால் தமிழ்நாட்டுடைய குரல் நசுக்கப்படுது.
Considering this could lead to another state versus centre fight, Home Minister Amit Shah has issued a clarification assuaging concerns of states like Tamil Nadu.
श्रीमान स्टालिन जी, मोदी सरकार ने लोकसभा में स्पष्ट किया है कि डीलिमिटेशन के बाद प्रोरेटा के हिसाब से दक्षिण के एक भी राज्य का एक भी सीट कम नहीं होगा.
We'll have to wait for some clarification on exactly how delimitation this time will be carried out to ensure the number of seats isn't based on the number of people in a state. 2025 has been a year of upheaval, of momentum, marked by innovation and economic shifts. Yes, but also wars, geopolitical tensions and social churn. As we go into 2026, there are challenges, but also hope and progress.